The article on the tapes this week, there was a subject of raising the hush money.
Oh, yes.
And
about
they
the
said,
priests.
can you get $1 million? And the president said, you can get it in cash. I know where it can be gotten. And the question is, who the hell will handle it? And they talk about Tom Pappas from Greece, who could give them the cash.
Donald Nixon had gotten
$6 million.
$6
But in the Realist article, the first one where I had the press conference,
right,
we talked about Tom Pappas funding this money, this secret money
yes,
that
they
was
used.
in
your Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped?
Then there was
in August 72 of the Realist, right?
August 72 of the Realist. Then there was a question here that many listeners may have missed, but as you get your Watergate tapes in print, look this up. They said, you don't need $1 million right away, but you need $1 million. Is that right? And Dean said, that's right. And the president said, you need it in cash, don't you? I'm thinking out loud here for a moment. Would you put that through the Cuban committee? Dean said, no. Is it going to be checks, cash, money? How will it, if it comes out, are you going to handle it? Is a Cuban committee an obstruction of justice if they want to help? And Dean answered, well, they have the priests. And the president said, would that give it a little bit of a cover?
Right.
So the president knows who the priests are, right?
Obviously.
They're having a conversation. So should we talk about who the priests are? Because at my college class last week, I talked about the priests. If you get the second article I did that's also at the Thunderbird bookstore, or you could write to KLRB, on page 22 of the Realist, I talk about William Sullivan, Division 5 of the FBI, and he is the most important liaison of the past political assassinations. And the
Don't
FBI,
forget
the government.
the deleted part right after that.
Oh, yeah. Yes, we'll go into William Sullivan. But here is a section, page 22. It said the American Council of Christian Churches, shortly before LBJ died.
Now, this is your article.
This is my article in the Realist, page 22. Said shortly before Johnson died, he revealed a curiosity that caused him to find that the real assassins of President Kennedy came from the Caribbean, called Murder Incorporated, a series of church fronts funded as a school for assassins in Oaxaca, Mexico, dressed as missionaries. Now, these men are dressed as priests. The same church people interested in such activities have direct contacts to important White House aides. So here's Dean this week talking with Nixon about their priests. And I had this last July of 73 in the Realist. It says they have contacts with the FBI, the CIA. Agency money, now listen to this, is sent to churches who pass it to persons they never met and will never meet. The money hires assassins.
And so these obviously, and your very next item is about the Cuban exile
community.
Group.
Yes, the Cuban exile community. Because a man said on the bus going to Mexico with Oswald by the name of John Howard Bowen, whose alias was Albert Osborne, and he worked with the Cuban committee and with William Sullivan of the FBI and the White House, and they dressed as priests. The man ran a missionary school down in Mexico, and they sent out assassins for Guatemala, Nicaragua, Jordan, Middle East. You know, when Kennedy died, they said, this isn't a domestic assassination. We're not a banana republic. And the same priests were shooting down there that were paid in Washington. And we were buying the banana weapons.
Of course.
See? Now, here's the name of some churches, Flo, that I won't. Here's a woman's name in Virginia. Now, this is volume 25 of the Warren Commission hearings. I spent years on this, so this is why I could write there. Here's a woman from Virginia, page 55 of volume 25. Her name is Mrs. Fraley. You can read it up, so I'll read it. Mrs. Virginia Fraley. She met Mr. Bowen 20 years ago. This is an affidavit she signed. She wasn't a witness. She's not seen him until a year and a half ago. She's known him 19 and a half years. Some deacon in Knoxville, Tennessee, in September 62, gave him enough money for a mission for 3 years. But it's not sponsored by the Baptist Church. They were dressed as Catholic priests. They're doing missionary work on their own. A Mrs. White in Pikesville, Tennessee, said that she recalled the missionary in Mexico. She sends $35 a month weekly. She never met Bowen. That's the man that sat with Oswald. She's never seen him, only contacts him in the mail. She knows nothing about his background. She gives aid and assistance to any needy person who does the work of the Lord.
Oh, wow.
Now, these are the priests. Is that heavy?
Oh,
now,
sad.
Here's George. Do the work of the... Now, these people, I have a list of people that have been sending money down to these churches. Now, this is a CIA front. The federal government sends money down to various churches through California, Virginia.
And as usual, the poor people fund it. As usual, the taxpayers and the consumer groups and the church.
No, they're a conduit of money.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that as usual, the little people, some of them possibly sincere, that think they're, really contributing to a church.
Oh, yeah.
Although nobody with taste and brains would do that.
Oh, well, you see, I think that the very richest people keep track of their money. So I can't believe that these people from Oregon, Washington, Virginia, Tennessee are just voluntarily sending between $35 and a couple $100 a month to a missionary they never met.
It's a washing machine.
It's a washing machine.
To clean up the money.
That's right. So they dressed as priests and they go down there. So the Realist article mentions the Murder Incorporated as being missionary churchmen. So when the White House tapes came out this week, there you have the president saying, Dean says, well, they have the priest to cover it. And the president says, would that give a little bit of a cover? And he says that would give some for the Cubans and possibly Hunt, and then you've got Liddy. So the president knows about the priest because he doesn't say what priest.
Oh, no, he's very au courant with that part of it.
So
but you see, the other end of the spectrum is the Nazis in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. You see, because one thing that the establishment do that we, unfortunately, I don't know who we are, but I assume anti-establishmentarians don't do, is to cover each end, you see. Yeah. They have the priests and they have the Nazis. So when the school or any other situation gets totally out of hand and the police can't quite deal with it, then they either send, whether it's Wallace's, when Wallace's campaign got out of hand, when the school situation got out of hand, this recent Yvonne Golden episode was one of the things that helped to make them even more visible, then either the priests or the Nazis are available to them.
Oh, wait a minute, I got a better one for you than that, Flo. They can be both, because the same John Howard Bowen, alias Albert Osborne, that sat on the bus with Oswald that ran the School of Priests, was arrested in 1942 for being a Nazi in Tennessee and for burning the American flag.
Full circle.
He's both a Nazi and a priest.
Oh, boy.
And he's never an ordained minister, but they wear the collar.
Of course.
And they're funded by the Central Intelligence Agency, the taxpayers.
They're Nazis in drag, in other words.
Well, they're Nazis at their campsite, and they're priests in Mexico. Of course. And they travel as the men of the church.
And they use whatever cover they happen to want.
They have three ways. They can be Nazi and priest or Nazi.
That's right.
But they're all the same. The FBI knows these people. If I have all these records on them, they can certainly begin to figure this out, unless they're funding them, which they are.
But you see, the peculiar thing is that the Nazis killed 6 million people, and they've turned up in the Bay Area, and no one seems afraid of Nazis. But purportedly, and we don't act, I have never seen a body of a white person killed by a black man, but I'll stipulate that it's happened. But 12 white people are supposed to have been killed by black people, and they have a zebra fright up there that is bordering on psychosis. And what I can't understand is, how is it that there's never enough evidence to make some people believe that Nixon is guilty, but there's never so little evidence that they won't believe that a black person is guilty of anything from grinding white people up as hamburger and serving it to each other or whatever, you see. And it's that kind of pathology that you're dealing with here, because you see, we don't get any radiation at all from the Nazi situation. No one seems to believe, not even Jews seem to be the least bit scared that the Nazis might repeat what they did in Nazi Germany. But they're prepared to put the whole black community
12 whites.
in a position of responsibility, searching cards issued, South African methods, breaking down doors, holding people in jail. And did you see what they did to the Muslim headquarters of those people?
It's terrible.
Gail Christian did a story on NBC that showed the damage and destruction of this little pitiful place that the Muslims had. And they and then of course they sent 4 of them back because they didn't have sufficient evidence, but made very certain to announce that if they should get a little bit of evidence, they know they only need about a teaspoonful, whereas they got to have a mountain range of evidence for Nixon, or people are still making excuses.
I know. Well, there's another thing in the White House memo this week which was very interesting because it goes along with this thing. When the president and John Dean are having a talk about how to cover up in the Oval Office, March 13th, 1973, and they're saying in reference to the allegiance of FBI former official William Sullivan. And this is what Dean says: if I have one liability in Sullivan here, it is his knowledge of the earlier
unintelligible
blank that occurred here.
Want to guess what that's all about?
Well, William Sullivan was not only, according to news memos, on the secret police force of the White House, that co-Intertel program, but when he was asked about
FBI
if he approved of it,
director, wow.
Yeah, he was the assistant director of the FBI. When they asked him if he approved of this domestic program, He said, I approve of it 1,001%, and I was responsible for it.
Boy.
And in my article in The Realist, I said that he was behind the political assassinations of Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and John Kennedy. And 10 years later, he bragged, how can you be 1,001%? And he claims responsibility. And he claims that he even took things from J. Edgar Hoover's desk and did things over his head. And at the time of the Watergate arrest, William Sullivan had taken from Hoover's desk things that John Mitchell and Nixon information that would have kept them from being president, and they were in John Ehrlichman's desk. If the media had listened to what I said, we wouldn't have an election because all of this information was available. How can you elect a man in who has things in his secretary's desk that prove that he isn't fit to be president?
Obviously. And what is this dialogue about whether you need a crime for impeachment? Whether you need it or not, you've got about 24.
Well, just stealing from the J. Edgar Hoover and putting it in your own desk.
Obstructing justice and accessory after the fact, and perjuring at least 100 times, but say 20, and harboring criminals, withholding evidence, obstructing justice through misleading evidence, failing and refusing to respond to a subpoena.
Well, there's a list of 57
fraud.
Impeachment charges. Did you know that?
And don't forget that had they responded appropriately to your material in 1972, that's very nearly 2 years, just 6 weeks or so before it'll be 2 years, they would not have had certain key people like Chotiner dead.
Oh.
And, well, there have been about 5 deaths of people that really should have been questioned immediately in 1972.
You know, the way I concluded my article is this was July 72. There were 2 paragraphs or sentences that I think are important because I wrote this will be 2 years ago in 2 months.
That's right.
I said and I talked about Alger Hiss because he's talking about his name on the tapes. I said high summit meetings, a false sense of euphoria preceding elections does not conceal increased budgets for weaponry, new laws of repression, or further concentration of power in the White House. The family of humanity is not represented by the strategists who are few in number, still holding on to their power. Secret organizations such as the Lincoln Club, formed in '63, continue to finance and dictate to Richard Nixon that group should be carefully examined. Nixon's kind of power over other people's lives is elusive and vanishes rapidly at the proper moment. The human family, and that's why I like your humanist award, the human family has new weapons in the war against secrecy. Information is power, speed of communications is power, ability is power, sheer numbers of intelligent and concerned citizens become power, and facts are power.
And I noticed in your mail this morning, when you got such a tremendous amount of mail from Seattle. You know, when I traveled up there in connection with the schools, and I hear you're going to be hitting the campus trail, I find that there are groups in every state that are prepared to go after these senators so that they will not feel free to be so sure they're going to let Nixon off. And I think it would be very interesting whenever possible. For instance, when you go to Seattle or when you go to a certain state where the senator is shaky, where he's getting a payoff, for instance, Scoop Jackson carried the ball for the Trident missile submarine, which is $13 billion, you see, and they are vetoing bills for daycare and food programs. So I think it's important that the people from those states begin to take positions and make it known to their senators that they're going to dump them
and become intelligible of their own life.
Right.
The facts are out if they use them.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And that they don't just ask you what they can do, but they get on these senators because there are only 96 of them.
That's what
and they've got millions and millions of dollars.
Write letters,
we just have to let them know this is the end of the line for them. If they don't vote for impeachment,
you don't appeal to the senator, you appeal to the people that take on talk shows, write letters to the editors. You know, Flo, you are a fighter. That article Stephanie did about you, the warrior.
Compared to you, I'm a worm, honey.
No. We're all out there in the front trying to expose conditions that are wrong. We know they've always been wrong, but there's always a chance with the intelligence and know-how today to make them better, so that's no excuse anymore.
But you see, we have on our side at this moment the desperation. They have not time to clean up the shit and get it together. So the thing we need to do now, I think, is to crowd them. You see, Nixon is being crowded. These tapes, the release and publication of these tapes are a terrible error. There are a lot of very square and wonderful people who would never be anti-establishmentarian, but these tapes are shocking. And what I believe we can do now is to get larger cadres of people ready to require their senators to make commitments